so that, there we go. So that, let me share my screen again. So the way the flow is going to go this afternoon is I'm going to take a few minutes just to set the context as to where we are at in this journey and this process that we are in terms of the Africa Learning Community. Then Sib Sibanda, who is the guest I've just mentioned from Zimbabwe, who is here on a public holiday, is going to just give us a little bit of a theological foundation for the whole concept of faith and work. And then Lucy Doggett-Camero, which apparently I'm not pronouncing very well, is going to be speaking to us about faith-driven entrepreneur. And then we're going to go to breakout rooms. We're going to give you a few questions just to take a bit of time to digest the topic, such a vital topic. And then we'll come back together again at about the top of the hour, and we'll get some feedback from the various groups. So let me just set a little bit of context about why we're having this. In fact, Esther Chengo, who is on this call, was the one who said, let's have a continental learning community. Let's get together and discuss issues and topics and challenges and opportunities that we face as a continent. Instead of just having regional meetings and city-based meetings, let's have continental meetings. And so we got together last year, a group of about 40 leaders, and we brainstormed what are some of the pressing issues in Africa. What are some of the common challenges? One of the top issues that was raised was youth. And so we've had two of these learning communities dealing with the youth. We had this one here where we looked at Anya Letsatsi from 2 Billion Children. We have Next Move with Joe Bonga, and we had Heartlines with Olafile. The second one was in February this year, where we had the second part of the youth, where we had inputs from Rachel Lukolo and from Bright, talking about how do we reach and how do we disciple the next generation. So that's been a little bit of a context. But in investigating and looking at Africa's youth, and here's just a few of the slides, that Africa has got a median age of 18.8 years of age. 10 of the 10 youngest nations in the world on Africa. We have Africa has got a youth bulge in terms of demographics. And this can either be a very positive dividend if we are able to reach and disciple this next generation. And if there's effective, good governance, then there's going to be opportunities, economic benefit, and development. However, on the negative side, if we don't do this above, then the youth of Africa are potentially a ticking time bomb, a lost generation who are living in perpetual waithood. And when you just look at the economics for young people, and today is not only aimed at young people, just to let you know, but I'm just explaining the bridge in terms of the context where we are at, that there are 10 to 12 million youth who enter the labor market per year in Africa as a continent, and yet there are only 3 million formal jobs, which means only 25% of Africans, young Africans, are entering the formal work sector, and up to 75% of the non-agricultural jobs in Africa are actually in the informal sector. And those who are under the age of 25 are 3 times more likely to remain unemployed, so-called anti-youth bias. And so in Africa, as Dr. Mbogo was so eloquent last year in Pretoria at our Congress, we have those who are unemployed and those who are underemployed and those who are unemployable. And those who are unemployable or underemployed or unemployed, they live on the fringes, on the margins of society. Not only do they face great poverty, but they also become susceptible to extremism and getting involved in the wrong things. It really is a challenge. Africa is a continent of 1.4 billion people, 18% of the global population, 30% of the global landmass, 60% the world's arable land, 60% of the global solar potential, 70% of the world's cobalt, amongst many other minerals, and yet we have less than 3% of the global GDP. 18 of the 20 poorest nations in the world on Africa, and 35% of people who are classified to be living in extreme poverty are from Africa. And so we have a challenge. And the fact is that the formal economy is unlikely to be able to absorb our youth bulge and our huge population. And so that is why we have taken this opportunity now to focus on entrepreneurship. That is what the focus of this particular learning community is. And it could well be that we have a whole series on entrepreneurship. And so Today, we're going to hear from two people. Our first presenter is going to be Sib Sabunda. I know that he's going to introduce himself, and so I'm not going to try and introduce him. Many of you would have seen his profile already, but I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to hand over to Sibs. Once again, for those who've joined the call later, just to say thanks so much to Sibs for joining us on a public holiday, and congratulations on your Independence Day in Zimbabwe. Over to you, Sibs.
Good afternoon, everybody. I trust you can all hear me well. Peter, can you confirm?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, it's wonderful to be with you all, and really excited to share this time with you. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of context of who I am, because it does play into what I want to share with you this afternoon. So I live in Zim. I'm Zimbabwean, born and raised, married with 2 children, although technically at 18 and 19, not really children anymore. I did spend time in Johannesburg, about 11 years. And really the first 20 years of my working life was spent planting churches and leading churches in Zimbabwe and in South Africa. But now I'm a sort of co-founder and director of an IT company based here in Harare. I also work with an organization called Resource Global. And Resource Global is really looking at helping to help young professionals to connect their faith and their work. So that's my real passion. And that's really what I want to talk to you about this afternoon. And then also do some content development as well for Ziwani. Now, I want to just share very quickly, just by way of setting a foundation for what Lucy's going to talk about. I'm going to share with you a talk which I adapted from Tom Nelson. Tom Nelson founded an organization in the States called Made to Flourish. And Made to Flourish is a network of pastors who've realized the importance of integrating faith and work. And so they've come together to encourage each other and help each other as they work this out practically through their local churches. But really, just to set the scene, I'm going to play a short 2-minute video from Greg Forster, who's from a different network in the US called Oikonomia. And he's really going to set the stage for what I want to talk about.
People spend most of their lives working. When you add up work in the home, work in workplaces, work in neighborhoods and communities and schools and all kinds of other places. And if we don't put our faith into our work, then Christianity really becomes a leisure time activity. But Christianity can't be what the Bible says it is if it's only a leisure time activity. It has to be something that we live out 24/7. If the church isn't helping people integrate their faith with their work, then the church has a tendency to become simply a provider of religious goods and services. But the Christian faith really needs to be about a transformation of the whole life, that people have to change the way they live and what they believe and live out a new way of life. That's the gospel. And if we aren't prompting people to put their faith into the activity that takes up the majority of their lives, then I think that's a real danger sign that we're slipping back into that provider of religious goods and services model. When local churches help people make that integration, it deepens their discipleship. It helps them transition from a discipleship that's defined as engaging in a few special activities to a discipleship that is really a transformation of the whole life. It also has an impact far beyond the boundaries of the church. It shines the light of the gospel into the culture as Christians go out into workplaces and neighborhoods and do their work in a way that reflects their faith. And in addition to discipleship and cultural impact, it also puts the gospel itself in front of our neighbors. So this one thing actually works in all 3 ways, almost as if it were all being designed by somebody who knew what he was doing.
So about 15 years ago, when I was pastoring here in Zim, that's when I really started to think about the integration of faith and work. As a minister, someone who was preaching often, I started to think about how are the things that I'm preaching on Sunday actually impacting people on Monday in their places of work. And so that's when I really connected with what Tom Nelson had to say, the founder of Made to Flourish. And he actually got up in front of his church one day. He was leading a church, and he said he wanted to repent. And so you can imagine people were all very nervous. What does he want to confess? What major sin, etc.? And he said, I had a majority-minority disparity. I had equipped his people for the minority of their lives, not the majority. And so he was saying everything he was doing as a church leader was really preparing people more for their private lives than for their public life, especially at work. And a big reason that we do this is this thing we call dualism. And dualism is simply this idea that all of life can be separated into two main categories, good and evil, sacred and secular. This fragmented vision of reality puts spiritual things like prayer and Bible reading and so on into the sacred category, and worldly things like work and pretty much all other public engagement in the secular category. And this view creates a hierarchy where the only meaningful things in existence are those that are in the sacred category. And I'm not going to preach this to you. I don't have time. I really just want to highlight, and you might recognize this if you're a marketplace leader or if you're a church leader, you may have heard some of these things coming through or maybe aren't even aware. But just to paint a picture for you, very broadly speaking, about some of the consequences for the people sitting in our pews as they listen to a message on Sunday and interpreting it as spiritual or private truth, and then go into a context on Monday where they're seeing that as a secular environment. And so here's a couple of things I want to rattle off. So consequences for marketplace believers: they sometimes feel lonely and separated from the life of the church, as their busy work schedules prevent them from engaging fully with church meetings and events or volunteering for certain church roles. They feel guilty because outside of work, there appears to be very little time to do the things that they think matter to God, things we call spiritual things. They are neutralized as gospel change agents in their places of work, their industry and society, because they do not see their day-to-day work as a platform for such change. They're seeing spiritual work in terms of what they do on Sundays. They apply biblical teaching to their private lives, so at home and at church, but embrace ungodly philosophies and practices which drive their industries and places of work. They rely on the Holy Spirit in their private lives, so in relationships, in parenting, marriage, and so on, but do not seek his help, his counsel, or his guidance, or expect his power in their work. They see the purpose of work primarily as provision, self-fulfillment, and sometimes perhaps generosity, not so much as a means to fulfill the chief end of man, which is to glorify God. They see the proceeds of their secular work as belonging to them, not to God, and it's up to them to see how much they give to God for the spiritual work of the church. Some even make the mistake of abandoning their God-given secular jobs in pursuit of some kind of spiritual vocation within the church or Christian ministry. And I have to say, as someone who's pastored for a long time, I think as church leaders, we're often guilty of encouraging people to do that, or certainly not helping them to understand that spiritual work is not just work in the church. It can be work in a bank or a school or in politics, etc. And many waste their most valuable years of kingdom impact through their work while longing for the day they can pull back from secular work and engage in spiritual ministry. You know, when I retire, then I'll go and do spiritual work, etc. Or I'll pull back and just do 3 days at work, and then I can do spiritual things. And then finally, churches tend to highlight, celebrate, honor, and support spiritual work while failing to recognize and affirm the necessity and value of ordinary Christian work. And an example of that is if someone is planting a church or a small group, we'll get them up and pray for them. But if someone is appointed the superintendent of a hospital, that's not worthy of mention on a Sunday because we don't see that as spiritual. So I want to talk about the what's at stake if we as Christian leaders don't break down that false divide between the secular and sacred, and don't help believers to see that for the believer, all things are spiritual because all things are done as unto the Lord. The first thing, of course, is the rightful worship of God. The first question in the Westminster Shorter Catechism: what is the chief end of man? Answer is the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy God forever. That is to glorify God, not just on Sundays or in my personal times or in my marriage, but to glorify God in all aspects of my life. Now, if I separate different parts of my life, and I'm seeking to glorify God in only parts of my life, then the biggest sin in all of this, when we live a dualistic, divided life, is we rob God of his glory. And as church, certainly for those who are leaders and teachers, if we're not helping people to see this, we're accomplices to people robbing God of glory. Tom Nelson said, I reinforced an impoverished paradigm that worship is primarily on Sunday. It detracts from the glory of God when we do not disciple people with Monday in mind. The second thing that's at stake is the spiritual formation of our people. I love 2 Corinthians 3:18 that says that we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory. And that's a wonderful idea of Christian sanctification as we become more and more like Jesus. But have we thought about where, how, and through what means that transformation actually takes place? For many of us and many Christians, when you think about when are we transformed into the likeness of the Lord? We think of maybe a worship session or listening to the Bible, but ask yourself the question, how did it happen for those heroes of the faith that we read about in the Bible? Wasn't it while they were tending sheep and selling cloth and looking after animals and teaching and all of that sort of thing? God doesn't wait for Sundays to bring about sanctification. In fact, our workplaces and our places of work is probably one of the biggest crucibles for Christian sanctification that the Holy Spirit uses. But if our people are separating that and not seeing their places of work as an area of God's activity, then the things that God brings into our lives, which are meant to challenge us and cause our faith to grow, are the very things that cause believers to be disillusioned and feel that God has forsaken them. Next thing that's at stake is gospel credibility. When you think about the gospel, and I know it's hard when you've been a Christian for a long time, but when you think about the story that there was a man who was born and 2,000 years ago, and he was a good guy, and he did lots of good things, and then he died, and then he rose up again, then he ate fish with his friends, then he went into heaven. It sounds like a crazy story, right? The gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing. But it's so much harder to refute when people can see the effect of the gospel in people's lives, and people who are living out this gospel in a way that brings credibility to the transformation that the gospel brings. But when we separate our secular and sacred, and we leave God at home and are not taking our faith into our places of work, then that credibility, or that people don't have opportunities to see those transformed lives. And when Jesus said, you're the salt of the earth, the light of the world, it's not a description of our Sunday meetings. It's a manifesto for gospel-centered social and cultural renewal every day of our lives. The next thing that's very closely linked to that is gospel proclamation. As our people begin to live these lives and apply their faith in their workplace, so unbelievers, as Peter says, will be asking questions. And he says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give reason for the hope that you have. But why would non-believers ask questions when the Christians they encounter think and act the same way they do? We handle confrontation in the same way. We have the same fears. We use money in the same way. We have the same dreams, the same ambitions. And we all, for all intents and purposes, we look exactly like non-believers in the workplace. Why then would anyone ask us to give reason for the hope? It's only as that happens, that we live out our faith, then there are those opportunities for people to ask and say, why did you say that? Or why do you think that way? Then there's opportunities for believers to share their faith. The final thing that's at stake is the common good. And the common good is really talking about the good of all people. And in theology, we talk about common grace, and it's we distinguish that from special grace. And common grace is really just God's goodness to all, to his creation, to all that he's made, regardless of faith. In Matthew 5:45, it's expressed in this way: he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. And when we, as believers, don't take our faith into our places of work, like urban planning, where people should live and how they should live, like politics and how governance is done, like economics and all of those sort of things, then humanity is robbed, and indeed creation is robbed of the good that God wants to bring into society. You think about William Wilberforce and how he brought his faith into his place of work, and how he brought his faith into the political arena and how much good came out of that. And if he had kept his faith to Sunday's worship or Sunday singing and listening to sermons, then society would have been robbed of that. And so these are some of the things that are at stake when we don't break down that false divide. And as Christian leaders, whether you're a church leader or marketplace leaders, this is something that I believe is something that we need to be intentional about. And I'm going to hand over shortly to Lucy, who's going to start talking about what they're doing as FDE. What's exciting for me, having been on this journey, started talking to people about 15 years ago, and it was almost a strange conversation for many people, but there's so much. God has been so busy at work, and there's so many wonderful organizations, of which FDE is one, that can help both church leaders and marketplace leaders. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Sibs. That was outstanding. It's such a good theological and practical understanding, and it's so important that everything that we do has got a biblical theological grid, and we do have this false dichotomy between what is secular and what is sacred, what is spiritual and what is unspiritual. So you've just laid a really helpful layer of foundation, and I'm now going to hand over to Lucy, who's going to come in and really just build on top of that with being a little bit more pragmatic in terms of entrepreneurship. And so Lucy is going to introduce herself, except I'm just going to say that she is UK by birth, British by birth, but Kenyan by marriage and living in Nairobi. So Lucy, we look forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Sorry, my laptop froze. Thank you so much, Peter, for that fantastic introduction. It is so great to be with you, and thank you for this opportunity to share. Sibs, that was just fantastic. I was taking notes, I was learning. Yeah, that was brilliant, and such a concise summary. So what I would love to talk to you about is faith-driven entrepreneur. So as Peter introduced me, I am Lucy Doggett. I'm the Director of Partnerships for Africa, and I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. So we work with entrepreneurs in particular. So a person who organizes and operates a business, taking on greater risks than normal in order to do so. So whether you are an entrepreneur on this call yourself, or whether you are a church leader, I would love to just speak to you about practically what you can do, but also why it is so important in Africa as we grow to serve the entrepreneur community and to work with especially our young people and our youth entrepreneurs. So just to give you a couple of statistics, I'm not going to read every single one out to you, but this is what we are seeing globally. Entrepreneurs, face some real challenges. And in Africa, obviously, you can imagine with young people, as Peter was saying, who are underemployed, unemployable, or unemployed, they also face these additional challenges beyond not having a job, beyond the financial implications. So what I'd love to do is just give you a quick overview of Faith-Driven Entrepreneur Africa as I jump into this presentation.
There's a powerful voice coming from Africa. Young, bold, courageous, powerful voice coming from Africa. Young, powerful voice coming from Africa. Young, bold, courageous, curious. This voice is growing, and yet what the voice is revealing is as old as the world itself. A story that is timeless, no matter how often it is told. It's a story of redemption, a story of grace, mercy, sacrificial love. It is God's story. It is our story, and this story is deeply rooted in Africa. History has made it ugly, twisted it, too often made it tragic. But a voice is growing louder by the day. It is telling God's story anew. Gone is the focus on foreign aid and imperial handouts. receding is the worn thin veil of an underdeveloped, impoverished third world. In its place, stand tall the beacons of industry, economy, innovation. Africa is an exciting frontier in the global marketplace. The size and population of this continent, along with its diverse cultures, provide us with rich insights into God and His creativity. Through the power of God's story, we will highlight a continuing conversation of how businesses are flourishing here. And we aim to showcase how God's redemptive work is alive and well in the Christ-following entrepreneurs of Africa today. God's story is continuing to unfold, and we are being introduced to a new narrative of Africa. We have much to learn from one another and much to share with each other. You don't have to hop on a plane to find this movement. It's wherever we are. We are all part of a vibrant and growing global economy. The industry and address may look different, and yet our shared identity is firmly rooted in Christ. Faith-driven entrepreneur, Africa.
Great. So that gives
If you're a
you
business owner, then animated explainer videos are the
Sorry about that. Great. So that's a very brief introduction teaser to Faith-Driven Entrepreneur Africa. So I would like to talk to you a little bit about the church in particular. So I know Sibs has given us this fantastic overview. And so with entrepreneurs then, and a little bit more in particular to zero in on, what is the impact that the church, when the church rallies around entrepreneurs, what is the impact that they have on the world and on the church and on their communities? So 64% established community programs. They give 3 times more than other Christians. They are leaders in their communities. They start to tackle issues like bribery and other ethical issues in our society. They bring people to faith and they strengthen the faith of their other employees. So for us, supporting entrepreneurs, especially within the church, is a real passion of what we do and why we exist. So we are a movement dedicated to gathering 1 million Christ-following entrepreneurs and equipping them so they can fulfill their call to create and transform the world around them. So this is our vision. This is what we believe that 1 million Christ-following entrepreneurs would achieve. This is what it would look like in the world. And this is why we do what we do. So our movement is based on these 12 marks of a faith-driven entrepreneur. You're welcome to go on our website, get a bit more deeply. We actually have a web page for each of these with resources, but there's a few I'll pick out for you. Things like generosity as an entrepreneur, things like being excellent in all that you do, the importance of partnership and collaboration. Don't worship work is around the priority you place on work. And of course, the first and second are the most important for us. The fact that we are called into this by God, and we have an identity in Christ, and that is who we are as we operate as entrepreneurs. It is always through our identity in Christ. So as an organization, the way that we serve entrepreneurs is through our content and through our community. So within our content, we have a list of all the resources there that we have. And our community operates through foundation groups and then longer term entrepreneur groups. So I will tell you a bit more about that as we go on. We also have weekly prayer meetings. We have an annual conference with watch parties that you can attend and with your community as well. In Africa, these are just some of the numbers. We've had 794 facilitators leading almost 1,000 groups across the continent. We've worked with over 250 churches in 33 African nations, and we have 50 partners, including Resource Global, Movement Day, Zawani, and many, many, many others across the continent who work alongside us with other aspects and fantastic, partnerships there. So the way that we work with churches, I know some of you are pastors. So the foundation groups that I mentioned are 8 weeks. They are online or they're in person. They're 1 hour per week. We provide you with the resources for that. And then the heart is not just to do a course and get a certificate, but what does it look like to walk together, to do life together, and to grow disciples? So we continue to support churches after the 8-week series to continue meeting monthly or twice a month or whatever that looks like as a church with our resources. Then we start to think about multiplication. What does it look like in other congregations to do many cohorts a year, to do industry-specific groups? So we will work with you on a strategy for multiplication. And then finally, we want to transform the world. That's the ultimate vision. And so we start thinking about our city and our global networks. And I know that for Movement Day, the city is so impactful. It's so important. So I will talk a bit more about that. But some of the key things we're doing in Africa, so community, we've talked about this. What we do, it is community, community, community. Everything now stems from that. We believe that entrepreneurship in Africa is hard. Being a Christian entrepreneur, living out your faith is hard. So how can we connect you into community, or how can we empower your existing community in the church? We're building out local leaders. That would be our ambassadors that help take the movement into unreached areas. That might be mentors that are mentoring the groups that we work with. We're storytelling. We have a whole website of African videos. I've got a colleague on the call called Chinny. She's fantastic. She's somewhere in the chat. Chinny, if you want to drop some links for people to see some more of this, maybe for the foundation groups and for the Africa video series. So you can see the Africa stories. I don't have time to show them. Each story is maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes. So please check this out in your own time. We also do regional webinars for particular groups or churches at different points of the year. And then finally, our city networks. So once we see a community thriving, we start to establish city networks, which is where we support the churches, we connect them to entrepreneurs, we start bringing in the investors, we work with partners to do joint events to empower the city, and many other activities. We might start doing more practical learning through partners like Triga or Zawani that can actually do the more technical side of training. There is so much to it. I don't have enough time, but please check out City Networks. We'll also drop the link in the chat. But one thing I just wanted to shout out to Kampala. I'm not sure if there's any Ugandans on the call here today, but the City Network in Kampala is doing a phenomenal job. This is a screenshot taken from their website. So each of our City Networks, actually, we build them a small website as a leadership team in the local community. They host weekly prayer meetings for Ugandans across the country. They have monthly online workshops they're calling fireside chats, where they bring in experts to add knowledge and learning to the community. So there are so many spaces where we're seeing entrepreneurs coming together across the city to see their cities transformed for Christ. And it's something that we see as a mutual vision and passion with the Movement Day community. So to get a bit practical then in the last few minutes, I would love to talk to you about foundation groups, which is our starting point. If you haven't been in a foundation group, please join one. We'll drop the links in the chat for where you can find them, where you can see them. There's a new cohort of groups starting in the next few months. And if you are interested in leading one, please reach out to us. I'll tell you how to do that. But first of all, let me tell you a bit more about what they are and how we support you if you want to launch a faith-driven entrepreneur group. I hope this sound will be okay. Is there sound? No. So I'll just talk you through what you're seeing. So we have resources you can see for promoting groups. There's a platform for leading through groups. We have workbooks for the participants. We have facilitator guides. Our team train up all the leaders and walk with leaders throughout the groups. So step by step, we really do support you and your church, or if you decide you want to do it for just your friendship group in your neighborhood or whatever you want, we will support you to lead your group through the 8 weeks of the foundation group. So other resources apart from the foundation groups, which I really recommend you to either join or lead or bring to your church, is youth content. So I wanted to shout this out. It's a bit of a insider information because we have not yet launched it. It's looking that it will be launched in early summer, and I say that US summer. So we're looking at June or July, and that will be a series for youth entrepreneurs, because we've seen this need. We've seen the need to direct content and entrepreneurs that are just getting started. What do we do with our young people as they're finishing school and they need options for what's next? We have Africa content, as I mentioned. We have a video series for that, and stories. We have a podcast. There's a weekly prayer meeting. I will drop all these links in the chat if Chinny is, I'm sure Chinny is also busy there as well. We also have a faith-driven investor community we're trying to partner with them more closely to help access capital, and then the partners that I mentioned. So then next steps. When you're ready to go, tell us where and when you want to lead your group or get involved in a group. Just use the links that are coming through in the chat. Group Finder is our platform that will help people find your group. We will train you for a 1-hour session so that you're ready to go, and we will give you the promotional resources to lead your group. I recommend scanning this QR code. It will take you to a bit more information and a interest form. If you fill that, then one of our team will get back to you, set up a one-on-one call so that you can ask any more questions you have. This is the group's email you can use. We'll also drop the emails for the team in Africa. It's myself, my colleague Frank in Zimbabwe, and my colleague Chinny in Abuja, Nigeria. So we are all here to help you take your next steps into faith-driven entrepreneur. So thank you so much. It's just a privilege to be here with you and to speak to you, share with you, and I look forward to getting to know you more and answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Peter.
Wonderful, Lucy. Well, thank you, Lucy. Thank you so much, Sibs. That really has been incredibly helpful. So maybe just before we go to breakout rooms, Lucy, if there's someone sitting here thinking, I've got it. Sibs was watertight in his theological argument, and faith-driven entrepreneur, I'm in. I'm an entrepreneur, or I want to empower entrepreneurs in my church or my city. What is the step? Does faith-driven entrepreneur provide resources for that, and what is the step for that? I do think you provided it, but I just want to reiterate that.
Yes, so we do provide resources. We actually provide promotional resources that can be used on your Sunday service. We'll provide a QR code for your church groups for people to sign up. We provide resources for WhatsApp, Facebook, LinkedIn. So however you promote within your church, we can provide you those resources. We will also build the groups for you. So Chinny has dropped a link in the chat where you can sign up. You say, I want my group to be on Sundays at 4 p.m. or Mondays at 7 a.m. We will build that for you on your platform. We will give you a link that your group can use to register. We will train the facilitators. We have mentors that can actually mentor the facilitators. I know it's a lot of information. I packed a lot into 15 minutes. So we will also have a one-on-one call with you. So if you're feeling a bit like it's too much, please do just reach out. We'll set up a time to speak with you as well and actually walk you through these steps as well.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into breakout rooms, and we're going to just discuss a couple of questions, these 3 questions. The first one will be, why is entrepreneurship important in your city? That answer might be obvious. What did you learn about entrepreneurship today, and how can you apply what you learned today in your local context? So basically, we're wanting you to just practicalize what you've learned today. So we're going to put you into groups of about 5 to 6 in the breakout rooms. It will be for about 15 to 20 minutes. and we'll ask you to have that discussion and then come back with any particular major points or questions that you might have, and we'll do our best. But thank you so much to Chinny for being so active on the chat in putting so many links there. We really appreciate that. And thanks to FDE for being so accessible and providing resources. So I'm going to create the groups. Please accept the invitation into your breakout rooms and then answer those questions, and we'll give you a warning when your time is coming up to the end. So the groups are ready, and all the rooms are now open. So please go into those rooms, and we'll also put the question into the chat. Welcome. I know that people are arriving back slowly. So we'll just give a chance for everyone to come back into the main room, but nice to see you all again. All right. There's some people in the waiting room again. So I was scrolling through the groups. Some of the groups had 5 or 6, and 1 or 2 were slightly smaller. So I don't know if it was better to be in a big group or a small group. What we'd like to do is just get a bit of feedback, but of course we can't get feedback from 16 different groups because that will take us another whole hour. So I'm going to just pick on 3 different groups. I'm going to pick on group number 1. I'm going to pick on group number 4, and I'm going to pick on group number 11. And I'm going to ask someone from each group to just give about a 1-minute summary or feedback about the main point that was being made in your group. I know that some of you missed the questions and eventually we broadcast them, so I do apologize for that. But I'm going to ask Michael Boone, I know that you were in room 1. Can you just give us a 1-minute summary of what was the main discussion that took place in your room? Michael, are you with us? Can you give us a summary?
Yes. Essentially, we discovered was that entrepreneurship is something that's greatly needed within the church. And it's something that can be used in terms of helping those that come to faith, from outside of the faith. And they may have had jobs in terms of selling beer or liquor or whatever, but now they're looking for something they can do with their Christian faith to be able to make ends meet. And so we ended up the discussion by talking about how the educational piece is going to be so much more important because it helps to be able to change how one looks at money, but also changes how one looks at business as well. Because in some parts of society in the world, they see that Christian values do not connect with the business world. And that's something that needs to be changed through the education.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate that. I am going to give, not now, but I am a bit later going to give Lucy the final word. I do see there's a question in the chat is, are we going to be charged for the training on the FDE? So Lucy, when you come to do the closing remarks, if you can be ready to answer some of those questions that you might see coming up in the chat. In group 4, there was Evelyn from Zambia. Is Evelyn still on the call? Can you give us a 1-minute feedback about the main discussion taking place in your group?
Okay, thank you so much. So the main discussion was why entrepreneurship. Yeah, so we had someone from Accra, Dar es Salaam, and Nairobi. So when we talk of entrepreneurship, like for Zambia in particular, that's when people are coming into entrepreneurship. It's been more of informal jobs. Then when we go to Dar es Salaam, Nairobi, and Accra, their entrepreneurship is at its peak. So it's where people are working. They're also in entrepreneurship. So the only thing, maybe it's just the education part on how we preach the gospel now when it comes to entrepreneurship, because people are already doing it. But how do we combine it with the gospel? That's where we are. So that was the main discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Evelyn. Thank you for your feedback. And then in group number 11, let's have Richard Sampala, because Lucy pointed out that Kampala was the leading city on the FDE front. And we know that Richard is from Kampala. So Richard, are you still on the call? Can you give us some feedback? I did see Richard coming back into the main room. Anybody else who was in group number 11?
I was in group number 11.
Okay, let's hear from you.
And I think we all agreed on the why. And I think out of it all, we have to educate and we have to communicate. So we have to educate from a point of view of the church has to educate and be educated. But then we actually have to communicate between us, because then we spoke about, well, you can't just, in order for businesses to flourish, we have to actually communicate within the community, which is where Lucy with Faith Driven that is so important, the community, because so that we can grow our businesses and make wise decisions that are influenced.
Wonderful. So I see that Tito has taken the initiative to write an answer in the chat. So if you have not been given a chance and you would love to put some contribution, please do just pop an answer in the chat. We've got just a few minutes left. Lucy, is there anything that you want to pick up on? It might have come out in your group. It might have been a question. I see the question about charging. Do you want to just have a closing 2-minute remarks?
Yeah, thank you. There were a couple of additional questions in my group that were really great. I think one of them that came out was the particular demographic in Africa that many entrepreneurs, it's what we call in Kenya the side hustle. People have salaried jobs and maybe it's a small thing on the side. We see certain demographics like solopreneurs. They don't need long lessons about how to love their employees because it's just them. A lot of aspiring entrepreneurs, how can we teach you biblical principles before you've even started and actually get you those good foundations before you begin? So these are all things we look to address. Jessie, I was actually in group 4 with Jessie as well and Evelyn, and they were asking about this idea of transformational mindset. And I think this is my kind of, I think most impactful, the thing that we really are driving towards is we want to see businesses transformed. Absolutely. We want to see cities transformed. Absolutely. But the first thing that needs to happen is for us to be transformed. It's the transformational mindset. And that's really the foundations of what we do is we work with the entrepreneur to understand that they understand who they are in God. They understand their calling in Him to entrepreneurship and what does biblical entrepreneurship look like. From that transformation, that's when we then start to see that overflow into transformed businesses. We see people with the character to stand up to corruption and bribery. You don't just do that by yourself. You need that transformed mind in unity with Christ. And then from a community of transformed businesses, that's when we start to see the whole entrepreneurship space, changing a city for God. So that's why what we do, I believe, is really so impactful, is we work with you as an entrepreneur, first and foremost, for that wider impact. And yes, it is free. We are a ministry just wanting to serve. So please do reach out. I'll put my email in the chat as well. But thank you so much. It's been, even the conversations in the breakout room, it's just always a blessing for me to hear from people and get that feedback.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lucy. So there are many of you are already on our email list or on some of our WhatsApp groups. But if you are someone who perhaps has been invited by a friend and you're not on our email list, please, we've put Rebecca Mwale, who's the administrator for Movement Day Africa. Please send the email address to Rebecca, admin@movementdayafrica.com. And then Lucy also very kindly is putting faithdrivenentrepreneur.org. Chinny also put a whole lot of links earlier. And this really is a God-given opportunity for people like Faith-Driven Entrepreneur, people like Sibs, who have an absolute passion and a gifting for this. This is an opportunity for us to engage with them and to go and explore the website. I hope the website doesn't crash after this call because everyone rushes there, but you really are offering a very powerful and free service to empower the church and empower entrepreneurs in order for us to help overcome unemployment, underemployment, and poverty in the African cities. So a really important topic. We will engage with Sibs and Lucy further to find out who from their networks they believe we can add and perhaps have as part 2 on entrepreneurship and continue this conversation. But I think for now, all I can say is I just want to say thank you very much for being on the call. Thank you so much for so many staying until the end. We know that there are a few people who drop off when you go to groups, but it was clear that many people were in the groups and there was obviously very powerful conversation taking place. Our next Africa Learning Community will take place on the 20th of June. We'll send out those details of the topic and the speakers and the presenters and all the link for the Zoom. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope it was empowering. I hope it's helped to change your mindset. Sibs about a theological foundation, about the importance of faith and work, and then Lucy, faith-driven entrepreneurs. So please get hold of Rebecca if you have any questions, and reach out to Lucy and make use of those links. Otherwise, we've just gone 6:15, which was the time that we were aiming for, or maybe 7:15 if you are in East Africa, or 5:15 if you are in West Africa. So thank you very much to everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Feel free to unmute and say goodbye or good night in your mother tongue.
Au revoir.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Kwaheri.
Ciao,
Shalom
ciao. Até amanhã.
alaikum. Lalegashe.
Até a próxima.
Hi,
Au
everyone.
revoir.
Great to be with you.
La label.
Kwaheri.
Kwaheri.
A lot of people from Kenya.
Yes. Kwaheri.
Zikomo.
All right. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Have a great evening. Thanks so much for joining us. It's really been very productive. Please reach out if you need to, either to Lucy or to admin@movementdayafrica.com. All right. All the best. Ambani Gaatle.